A white cop tried to handcuff a black FBI agent 3 minutes later. He was the one under arrest. It started with the sound of rain hitting pavement and the taste of metal in the air. Officer Rick Danner's hand was already on his gun before he even saw the man's face. That's the problem with fear. You can load it like a bullet, and it'll fire before you even know it's there. Malik Harris had learned long ago how to keep his heartbeat steady under fire. Tonight, it wasn't bullets flying, it was something colder, sharper, and far more familiar. Suspicion. The sirens had faded minutes ago, but the streets still smelled of adrenaline. Rick stepped forward, eyes narrowing at the tall black man standing calmly beside an unmarked sedan. The rain slicked Malik's shaved head, the water catching in the sharp crease of his suit collar. The badge clipped to his belt was partially obscured by his coat. "Hands where I can see him," Rick barked. Malik didn't move. His voice was steady, almost gentle. "Officer, you might want to slow down and look at my credentials before you make a mistake." Rick's fingers twitched on the handcuffs. "I don't need your attitude. Step away from the vehicle." The two men stood in the glow of a flickering street lamp, the air between them thick with an unspoken history Rick had been raised to ignore, and Malik had been forced to survive. Somewhere, a car door slammed. Two teenagers stood frozen on the sidewalk, eyes darting between them. One was recording. Malik's mind was already mapping outcomes, calculating risks. He could flash the badge. He could walk away. He could also watch this spiral into the headlines by morning. But as Rick grabbed his arm, Malik caught something in his eyes, not just hostility, but the unshakable belief that he was right. "Sir, I'm a federal," Malik began. "Save it." Rick spun him, forcing his wrist behind his back. "You fit the description." It was an old, ugly phrase. Malik felt the heat rise in his chest, but he kept his voice level. "And what description is that?" Rick didn't answer. From the corner of the block, a low rumble cut through the rain. Malik recognized it instantly: bureau engines. The kind that carried people who could end careers with a single phone call. Rick heard it too, but by the time he turned, 3 black SUVs had pulled in tight, boxing them in. Doors opened. The street erupted in the sharp click of boots on asphalt. A woman's voice, cold and commanding, sliced through the tension. "Officer Danner, step away from my agent." Rick froze. The handcuffs in his grip felt suddenly heavier. Malik straightened, the rain tracing slow lines down his face. "Your agent?" Rick stammered. The woman special agent in charge, Linda Cortez, stepped forward, badge in hand. Her gaze could have cut glass. "Yes, my senior field agent. And you just laid hands on him without cause." The teens on the sidewalk kept filming. "Ma'am, I didn't," Rick started. "You did." Cortez's tone left no room for oxygen. She nodded toward 2 federal officers. "Take his weapon. He's under arrest for assaulting a federal agent." Rick's hand went to his sidearm, then stopped halfway. His mouth opened, then closed again. The cuffs he'd been so eager to use were now being snapped around his own wrists. Malik didn't smile. He just met Rick's eyes, calm, steady, and unflinching. The kind of look that said, "I've been here before, but this time, you're the one who won't forget it." The rain kept falling, washing the street clean. But the stain it left behind was older than either of them. Rick Danner stood in the wash of red and blue light, rain dripping from his chin, the cold bite of steel digging into his wrists. The crowd had grown, neighbors peering from their porches, strangers stopping on their way home, all drawn by the smell of scandal. The teenagers' phones were still up, hungry lenses capturing every humiliating second. "You can't do this," Rick muttered, his voice low, almost swallowed by the hiss of rainfall. "You can't arrest a police officer for doing his job." Special Agent Linda Cortez didn't even blink. "I can, and I am." She stepped closer, her eyes narrowing. "Your badge doesn't make you untouchable, Officer Danner. It makes you accountable." Malik Harris stayed silent, watching Rick's jaw tighten like a vice. He'd seen that look before, defiance dressed as dignity. But behind it was something smaller, more fragile: panic. Rick had been on the force for 12 years. In all that time, he'd never once been in the back of a cruiser in cuffs. Now, the rain blurred the edges of his world, and all he could focus on was the fact that he had been the one in control minutes ago. Linda's agents moved with clockwork precision. One retrieved Rick's Glock, cleared it, and bagged it as evidence. Another read him his rights, each syllable slicing through the night air like glass. "You have the right to remain silent. This is a mistake," Rick snapped. No, Linda said, her tone sharper now. What you did was a mistake. This is a consequence. The teenagers laughed under their breath, exchanging glances as they caught every word. Malik knew the footage would be online before sunrise, already climbing the algorithm, already dividing a country that didn't need another fracture. As Rick was escorted toward the SUVs, Malik finally spoke. His voice was calm, but it carried the weight of stone. Do you even know why I was here? Rick turned his head, rain streaking down his pale cheeks. Doesn't matter. You were suspicious. I saw you near the scene of what? Malik cut in. An investigation I was leading? Rick's mouth worked soundlessly. Linda stepped between them, holding up a hand. Not another word, Harris. Malik gave her the faintest nod, but his eyes stayed locked on Rick's. There was no satisfaction there, no smirk, no victory lap. Just the quiet understanding that this night would follow them both forever. Inside the SUV, the smell of wet leather mixed with adrenaline. Malik slid into the passenger seat while Linda took the driver's side. The wipers beat a steady rhythm as they pulled away from the flashing chaos. You okay? She asked without looking at him. Define okay, Malik said, his tone dry. Linda exhaled, her fingers tightening on the wheel. I should have been here sooner. You were right on time, Malik replied. 3 more minutes, and maybe I'd be the one in a cell. He stared out the rain-streaked window, the city lights smearing like oil paint. Every incident like this peeled back a layer of armor he'd built over years, armor that was starting to feel paper thin. Across town, Rick sat in a holding room that felt smaller than it was. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead, turning his skin an unflattering shade of gray. A federal agent stood guard by the door, impassive. Rick's mind raced. He replayed the moment he'd seen Malik, the dark figure by the sedan, the way he'd stood still instead of moving when commanded. In his head, it had felt like good police work, proactive, alert. But now, with the chill of handcuffs still lingering in his bones, he wondered if the truth was less flattering. The door opened, and a man in a Navy suit stepped in. He carried a legal pad and a look of mild irritation. I'm Special Agent Thomas Reeve, Internal Affairs, the man said, taking a seat across from him. We're going to have a conversation about tonight. Rick's voice was hoarse. This is insane. I was doing my job. Reeve's pen tapped the page. Your job doesn't include assaulting a federal agent without cause. Rick's face reddened. He looked suspicious. And what made him suspicious? Rick hesitated. The car. The way he was standing. Reeve's gaze sharpened. And his skin color? Rick's jaw tightened. I didn't say that. You didn't have to, Reeve said evenly. It's written all over the report. You had no bolo, no radio call, no probable cause. Just instinct. Rick leaned forward. Instinct keeps people alive out there. Reeve's voice cooled another degree. And bias gets people killed. Meanwhile, Malik was back at the Bureau's downtown office, stripping off his rain-soaked coat. The bullpen was nearly empty at this hour, save for a few agents buried in reports. Linda followed him in, her heels clicking softly on the tile. We'll be filing charges against Danner. Assault on a federal officer, obstruction, unlawful detention. It'll stick. Malik nodded, though he didn't look convinced. It won't change anything. Linda tilted her head. Meaning? He met her eyes. You put him in a cell tonight. Someone else will try it again next month. Different uniform, same eyes. This doesn't stop. Linda sighed, rubbing her temple. Maybe not, but it sends a message. Messages fade, Malik said quietly. Patterns don't. By morning, the video was everywhere. News anchors dissected every frame. Panelists argued over the audio, and hashtags bloomed like wildfire across social media. Some saw Rick as a reckless cop whose prejudice finally caught up with him. Others painted him as a victim of political theater. The truth, as always, was buried somewhere in the noise. Malik stayed off television. He didn't read the comments, didn't click the links people sent him. But he felt the ripple in his world, neighbors who looked at him differently now, strangers who recognized his face in the grocery store. And Rick? Rick woke up in a holding cell to the sound of a guard telling him he'd been suspended without pay pending investigation. His badge was gone, his gun gone, and the certainty he'd once carried like a shield was cracked beyond repair. The real battle, Malik knew, was just beginning. He'd have to testify. He'd have to endure cross-examinations that questioned his motives, his memory, his integrity. Rick's defense would be aggressive, aiming to paint Malik as overreacting, maybe even threatening. But Malik had one advantage that no amount of legal spin could erase: the truth, caught on camera in high definition. Still, as he sat in his apartment that night, staring at the rain on his window, he couldn't shake the feeling that justice was never as clean as the movies made it. Even when you won, there was always something left behind, something that didn't wash away. The courtroom smelled faintly of old paper and polished wood, the kind of scent that carried the weight of hundreds of verdicts before this one. Malik Harris sat at the plaintiff's table in a crisp charcoal suit, every line of his posture a deliberate statement, calm, unshaken, and unmovable. Across the aisle, Rick Danner avoided looking at him. The gallery was packed, reporters with cameras poised, community activists whispering in the back row, uniformed officers sitting stiffly, some in support of their colleague, others out of obligation. The judge, a silver-haired woman with eyes like cold steel, entered with a sharp rap of the gavel. This court is now in session. The prosecution wasted no time. They opened with the video, the rain-slick street projected in high resolution on the courtroom screen. The sound of Rick's voice ordering Malik to step away from the vehicle echoed in the still air. The moment the handcuffs snapped was met with a murmur from the audience. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," the prosecutor began, "this case is not about a misunderstanding. It is about an abuse of power, driven by prejudice, against a man whose only crime was doing his job while black." Rick's attorney rose slowly, buttoning his Navy suit. "What you just saw was not prejudice, it was vigilance." Officer Danner responded to suspicious behavior in a high-crime area. His actions, while perhaps hasty, were not malicious. Malik listened, expressionless. He knew this dance: how bias became instinct, how fear became reasonable suspicion. By the third day of testimony, the air in the courtroom felt heavier. Malik took the stand, the oath rolling off his tongue like muscle memory. The prosecutor's questions were straightforward: his credentials, his position in the bureau, his reason for being at the scene that night. "Agent Harris," the prosecutor asked, "at any point before Officer Danner approached you, did you engage in any activity that could reasonably be considered a crime?" "No," Malik said. "I was surveilling a location as part of an ongoing investigation. My badge was visible. My vehicle was legally parked." "Did you identify yourself to Officer Danner?" "Yes, twice. He ignored me both times." The prosecutor nodded. "And what happened then?" "He grabbed my arm and attempted to place me under arrest. Without cause. Without asking for clarification." Malik's voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. The facts were louder than anger. Cross-examination was another beast entirely. Rick's attorney leaned on the podium, trying for an easy smile. "Agent Harris, would you say the neighborhood where this occurred is known for violent crime?" "Yes." "And would you agree that standing near an unmarked car in the rain, at night, could be seen as suspicious?" Malik didn't blink. "Not if you have a badge on your hip." The attorney paced. "Isn't it possible that Officer Danner simply didn't see your badge? It was illuminated by the street lamp. If he didn't see it, it's because he didn't want to." A ripple moved through the gallery. The attorney frowned. "Agent Harris, are you accusing my client of willful misconduct?" "I'm saying he acted on bias, not evidence." When Rick took the stand, his voice carried the gravel of sleepless nights. He spoke of years on the force, of losing friends in the line of duty, of always being told to trust his instincts. "That night," Rick said, "I saw a man I didn't recognize in an area where we'd had multiple break-ins. He wasn't moving when I asked him to, and that made me suspicious. I didn't know he was an FBI agent until it was too late." The prosecutor pounced. "Officer Danner, would you have treated a white man in a suit the same way?" Rick hesitated just long enough for the silence to speak. "Yes," he said finally, but the word landed flat, unconvincing. Outside the courthouse, the city was a split screen. Protesters held signs reading "Justice for Malik" on one side, while on the other, blue-backed placards declared "Support our police." News crews hovered, their microphones hunting for sound bites. Malik avoided the crowd, slipping into a side exit. Linda was waiting, leaning against a bureau sedan. "You handled that well," she said. "Doesn't feel like it matters," Malik replied. "It does," she insisted. "Even if the verdict's not what we want, the truth is out there. People saw it. People have been seeing it for decades," Malik said, his voice quiet. doesn't stop it from happening again. Back in his apartment that night, Malik found an envelope under his door. No name, no return address. Inside was a single sheet of paper with one sentence. Not all of us are like him. It was signed with only a badge number. Malik sat with it for a long time, the paper warm in his hands. It didn't erase what happened. But today it had shown its face. And that, for now, was enough. The county jail was nothing like the TV shows. It didn't have the gritty glamour of a crime drama, just chipped paint, humming fluorescent lights, and the stale scent of too many people breathing the same recycled air. Rick Danner sat on the edge of his cot, staring at the wall. The badge-shaped shadow that had once hung in his mind was gone now, replaced by the hollow weight of a number stitched onto a faded orange shirt. At first, the days blurred together. He kept to himself, avoided trouble, learned quickly which inmates were looking for a fight and which just wanted to be left alone. But there was no avoiding the whispers. That's the cop. He's the one from the video. It wasn't until the third week that someone slid a folded scrap of newspaper under his cell door. The headline was about another shooting, another black man dead after a routine stop. Different officer, different city. Same story. Rick stared at it for a long time, then crumpled it in his fist. But that night, he didn't sleep. Malik Harris didn't think about Rick much after the trial, at least, not on purpose. The bureau kept him busy, cases stacking like bricks. But sometimes, in the quiet moments between briefings or during the slow hum of surveillance, he'd find his mind drifting back to that rain-soaked night. It wasn't sympathy exactly. It was more like curiosity. What did a man like Rick think about now that the uniform was gone? Did he regret it? Or was he still telling himself the same story that he'd just been doing his job? 6 months later, Malik found out. He was leaving a courthouse in a different part of the city, another case. Another long week when he heard his name. He turned and saw Rick leaning against a lamppost, wearing plain clothes, his frame noticeably thinner. "Agent Harris," Rick said. Malik studied him. "You following me, Danner?" Rick shook his head. "I was. Waiting. I heard you'd be here today." There was a pause. "You've got about 30 seconds before I decide this conversation's over," Malik said. Rick nodded slowly. "I wanted to say, I was wrong." Malik didn't move, didn't speak. Rick's voice was quieter now. "I didn't see you that night. Not really. I saw what I wanted to see. And I don't know if it's something I can fix," but he swallowed. "I've been thinking about it every day." Malik's expression stayed unreadable. "Thinking doesn't change what happened." "I know." Rick looked down at his hands. "But I had to tell you anyway." For a moment, neither spoke. The street noise filled the Gap car horns, a bus braking, the distant hum of a saxophone from a street musician. Finally, Malik said, "If you're serious, you won't say that to me. You'll say it to the next guy you're about to judge before you know his name." Rick's eyes lifted, and Malik could see something new there, not redemption, not yet, but the faint glimmer of understanding. Malik turned to leave. "Take care of yourself, Danner." Life moved on, as it always did. The news cycle churned. Other names, other stories took center stage. But for Malik, the case remained a quiet landmark in his career, not because it was a victory, but because it had exposed just how much work was still ahead. Sometimes he'd catch himself looking at the world the way Rick might have, sizing people up too fast, leaning on assumptions. And each time, he forced himself to pause, to look again. Because the truth was, everyone had a version of Rick Danner in them. And everyone had a choice about whether to let that version decide their actions. One evening, months later, Malik was walking home when he passed a small community center. A flyer on the door caught his eye. Community Policing Workshop, bridging the divide between officers and civilians. Below the text was a photo of the speakers. One of them was Rick. Malik stood there for a long moment, the winter air cold against his cheeks. Then he kept walking, hands deep in his coat pockets. He didn't know if Rick's work would change anything. He didn't know if people could really rewrite themselves. But he knew this. The night in the rain hadn't been for nothing. The next morning, Malik arrived at the bureau early. The city skyline was still bathed in that pale, forgiving light that made even the roughest edges look soft. Linda passed by his desk, coffee in hand. "You're here early." "Couldn't sleep," Malik said. She raised an eyebrow. "Case?" He shook his head. "Just thinking about the long game." Linda smiled faintly. "It's the only one worth playing." Malik looked out the window, watching the first buses of the day rumble through the streets. Somewhere out there, Rick was talking to a room full of people about the night that had ended his career. Somewhere else, another officer was making a split-second decision. And maybe, just maybe, it would be a different one. By the end of the day, the sun had dipped low, casting the city in gold. Malik walked out of the bureau with the same steady stride he'd carried for years. But something felt different, lighter, maybe, or just more certain. He didn't believe in happy endings. But he did believe in better ones. And sometimes, that was enough. Thank you for listening. If you find it interesting, please like and subscribe to follow the next stories.